Once again, it's time as we get tucked into another episode of the Grunge Bible Podcast. This is episode number 255. My name is Chris Salona, and I am here with Ethan Shalloway, the other half of Grunge Bible headquarters here, as we bring you an episode on the Screaming Trees album, Sweet Oblivion, their most popular album, certainly, and I would say my favorite album as well. But before we get into all that jazz, Ethan, how are you today? How are we doing?
Loaded question as usual.
It always is.
It always is. And I'm doing well, man. Calm through all the chaos. We're recording this on a Friday before Super Bowl Sunday. Kind of in my last phase, last time in Alabama. I'm making the move back, closing up a chapter. So it's been a lot going on for sure. Like busy couple weeks, but I'm doing really well. I can't complain. There's a lot of good things, and just the rhythm of life through hobbies and relationships and jobs and whatnot. So we're in the middle of it, but it feels good. I'm enjoying it. So no problems. Yeah, I'm not here to complain today. Yeah,
absolutely. There's enough complaining out there that other people are doing. So
my brother, like my brother said, I'm explaining all the things that go on, and he's like, you're the most unbothered person I think I know. And I was like, yeah.
Good trait to have.
I was like, I think I have to be, and he laughed and he's like, yeah. I mean, my dad thought that was funny. Sometimes you just gotta be unbothered. So things come and go. There's good and bad. And through it all, you just, just keep it on. So that's what we're trying to be. We're trying to be the unbothered in 2026.
Yeah, very nonchalant.
Yeah,
on the things that we can afford to be, for sure.
Yeah, I'm still passionate, enthusiastic about stuff, but I live by the motto:
roll with the changes.
You can't cry over spilled milk.
Exactly.
That's just how it goes.
How
are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well. We're recording this, like you said, right before the weekend officially kicks off. It's Friday, February 6th. This episode's coming out on Monday, February 9th. I've had a pretty decent week so far. Nothing really super new to report. It's kind of been business as usual around these parts, which is good. Kind of getting excited. I had that tune-up weightlifting meet that was canceled a couple weekends ago, but we're gearing up for the big one. I'm competing at the Arnold in Columbus, Ohio, the first week of March. So we are
awesome.
We're 4 weeks away. So we're in the final portion of the programming. A lot of heavy lifting going on. So Saturday, the day before the Super Bowl, I'm going in for a pretty big lift and just kind of put the pedal to the metal here for a little bit and see what we can get to. But yeah, things are good. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a good weekend. Like I said, I got a nice lift with the fellas tomorrow, and then I'll watch the Super Bowl with 25 of New England's most rabid Patriots fans on Sunday evening. So I'm excited for that. It'll be pretty good, and just going to be rolling along here. And once again, similarly to you, I don't really have too much to complain about. If you think about the history of this podcast, I used to complain a lot. I used to have a lot of grievances to air from episodes, I would say 1 to 125 and 126 to 255. It's been pretty quiet from my part. So, yeah, it feels fine. There's not much to complain about. I'm doing pretty good. I mean, I could find things to complain about, but that's so much energy to be mad. And I just,
there's so much wasted energy on complaining these days,
just trying to find more productive things to use with my time. Because
if you focus on stuff, it'll consume you. So it's better to, I guess focus a little differently. But yeah, Chris's Patriots in the Super Bowl. We're not going to talk too much about it because by this time we know the result, and we don't want to. We did that last year.
I think at the end of the whatever episode came out after the Super Bowl last year, the day afterwards, we spent like 40 minutes at the end of that episode breaking down what we thought was going to happen.
I would love to go back and listen to that.
Minor detail was
completely wrong.
Yeah, I don't think either of us were correct because neither of us expected that. But yeah, I mean, Patriots are playing with house money. As I was saying before we started recording, this is the first time they've been.
But here we go.
This is the first time they've been in the Super Bowl since Super Bowl 36 with no expectations, really. So same thing for the Seahawks. I mean, I think they were both like 60 to 1 odds or something at the beginning of the year. So it'll be interesting. And I'm just excited to have another opportunity to watch the Pats with the fellas and talk shop.
You get football every week this whole year. You can't beat that.
Exactly. It's been pretty good. So I'm kind of back in the saddle. That was the story of my life for much of my teens. So it's good to be back in the seat. You had a shift of about 5 years doing that. So maybe, your shift could be over or it could just be a year off. We'll see what happens. But
we'll be switching chairs for the next 10 years, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Back and forth.
I'm sure we'll meet in the conference championship a few times.
I would like that. That would be good.
Cool.
We'll have to make a wager.
So without going too deep into the football, because we can.
Because we can, yeah.
But this is a music podcast, and the people come here for the hard-hitting music breakdowns.
I have heard that, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, I could go on about this closing a chapter, but we're not going to do any of that right now.
We could do a post-mortem once you get back and sit
there we go.
A little bit. That'll be good. Big on the post-mortems, but we're able to talk about not music just as frequently as we talk about music because of the support that we receive from everybody who listens to this podcast, whether you've tuned in for a few episodes or whether you've been with us for all 255 at this point. We're very thankful for your support. We're thankful for your subscription, your following, your interaction, and for your money. And if you're interested in giving us your money, you can go to the Patreon link in the show notes and join at a level of your choosing, or you can purchase merchandise. Or if you're interested in making a donation, we can send our Venmos out too. If you just want to make a nice donation for the cause, we're definitely
a one-time donation.
Exactly. Or you could become a sustaining member on Patreon. We'd like to thank the members of the top tier on Patreon. So as you're familiar with by this point, you can choose your own adventure in addition to the $2, $5, or $10 tiers. And we do have a tie between Abraham and Frank and the Cracker Man at the top of the Patreon totem pole. The rest of the top tier supporters on Patreon are Doug Endy, Jamie Lynn, Carlene Salona, What the Fuck Is Up Denny's, Nikki Six, Black Hole Sean, Seattle 4 Fanboy from New Jersey, Sherry Matthews, Gochu John, Russell, Eddie Vedder Got Me Through My Second Divorce, King Buzzo Stole My Hair, The Michael Dooley Project, A Bit Dusty, Ultra Mega OK, Heidi in Chains, Looking California, Feeling Minnesota, and Chris Buckley. Thanks for sticking with us as we are getting deeper into 2026. We're already into month 2 here. Before you know it, spring will be coming, the winter will thaw, and the good times will keep on rolling.
Fingers crossed it's time for it to thaw out. I know this weekend's
going to be cold,
dude. This weekend's going to be no different with the wind chill. I saw some stuff for the Northeast. It's going to be
every morning I wake
blistering.
up and it's less than 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside. It's been a tough. I wouldn't say it's been demoralizing, but I've had to lock in a little bit more than the past few winters up here, which is fine. You got to, if nothing else, you can prove to yourself that you can still do it. So, as the Wonder Years have a song and they have a lyric, "These Northeast winters turn boys into men," and that one is ringing true this year for sure. So, doing the best we can.
I love it. Yeah, there's something about surviving in the cold and making the best out of like what's tough to move around. So
yeah, man.
But yeah, thank you everybody that supports us. It really does mean a lot. We're happy to do this. I mean, we've had a few conversations last week as we do all with the anniversary and the just like how long are we going to do this? And you know what? When it comes down to it, like we're gonna do it as long as we can because
do it as long as we can.
It is nice, and like no matter if you guys listen or not, we're happy to talk, talk into the void. So with that being said, let's move on to this day in music. We have a few things to dispense of, just 3. I'll let you go first because I'm not too familiar with.
February 9th, happy birthday to Carole King, born on this day in 1942, a standard bearer and a stalwart of the 1970s kind of folky singer-songwriter stuff. Her album in 1971 called Tapestry was one of her big breakthroughs, and it is one of my mom's favorite albums of all time. She spent a lot of time with that in her youth. A lot of really good songs on that one. I Feel the Earth Move, You've Got a Friend. Fun trivia part about the song You've Got a Friend. James Taylor ended up covering it, but Carole King, who was very friendly with James Taylor, wrote You've Got a Friend as a response to hearing James Taylor's song Fire and Rain. That song obviously is a particularly sad and lonesome song, and Carole King wrote this as a rebuttal, just reminding James Taylor that, hey, he had a friend, and James Taylor went on to cover You've Got a Friend, and it's a really, really great version of that as well. They've performed together countless times.
Toy Story song?
No, that's Randy Newman's You've Got a Friend in Me. This is a little bit different, but I guess the same overarching message.
Same idea.
You've Got a Friend in Me versus winter, spring, summer, or fall. All you got to do is call and I'll be there. because you've got a friend.
Amen.
So happy birthday to Carole King. Ethan, I know you wanted me to go first because you wanted this next one
I
here.
did. I wanted to talk about our favorite band here at the Grunge Bible Pod, and that is the Beatles. So in 1964, they make their famous appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. This is a marks their first live TV performance, U.S. TV performance, and
Beatlemania was born.
Beatlemania was born, man, and people love it. People love them, and it was it was a big deal, big time. Them being on TV, and it's hard to put myself in the shoes before TV was so widely accessible. So I've been doing that a lot recently. I'm just trying to think like what was the impact as it was happening, and kind of got me thinking about like the trees and how I look at them. Knowing Mark and his history and getting into it afterwards, like how I look at the music versus if you were going through it at that moment, what it was like. So yeah, this was an important music time in music history, obviously, with the Beatles being on live television.
It sure was, man. This was kind of where it all happened for the Beatles, certainly. And, a lot of those television appearances, so many people have had their big breaks or have been introduced to a larger audience. And this was probably one of the first iterations where it was instant captivation of the general public. So I think everybody knows how we feel about the Beatles around here, but needless to say, this was a very momentous moment. Momentous moment? That's kind of redundant.
But yeah.
Anyways, it was a big moment in music history on this day in 1964. And lastly, on this day in 1997, we talked about this, I think, when we discussed Soundgarden's album Down on the Upside, but February 9th, 1997 was the final Soundgarden show that they played before breaking up after the Down on the Upside tour. This show took place in Honolulu, Hawaii, and it was the final Soundgarden show until they made their reunion in 2010. And obviously, as we know, King Animal came in 2012. And they had quite the
almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, man.
29 years.
It's a long time, dude.
The 90s are slipping away for
the 90s are slipping away
for the
man.
20-year-olds. I mean, it's soon going to be,
when we started
2030
page,
and everybody's going to be 30. That was more in the 90s.
When we started this page, there were a lot of people that were still with us at the time when we started the page over 10 years ago now. But I remember commemorating, an 18th anniversary or 20th anniversary. And now it's, the 30th anniversary, the 34th anniversary, the 35th anniversary. Time is slipping away.
Yeah, man. Where does the time go?
Who knows where the time goes? So that's this day in music history for February 9th. And I think it's time to get into some screaming trees. So we've been on a little bit of a heater here recently with discussing some albums and certainly some of the bands that were at the beginning of what would become the grunge rock scene. And screaming trees are kind of no different. Stylistically, not a whole lot in common, I would say, certainly in their earlier years with what would become the grunge scene, but Screaming Trees were formed in 1984 in Ellensburg, Washington. Van Conner and Gary Lee Conner, two brothers from Ellensburg, teamed up with Mark Lanigan at the time, and Mark Pickrell was their drummer until 1991. But Mark Pickrell was not in the scene for this sixth album from the Screaming Trees, which came out on September the 8th, 1992 on Epic Records. It was their second major label release with Epic. Prior to that, they had been signed to SST Records, which was a pretty prodigious independent label, I think based out of California. And this was obviously the height of grunge mania. Nirvana's Nevermind hit the shelves in 1991, and the single soundtrack came out in June of 1992, of which Nearly Lost You was featured quite heavily. And so, Chris, was
Before you get too in depth with the history of it, I just want to. I was thinking about this. So if you had somebody that came up to you and asked, I've never listened to Screaming Trees, but I want to get into them, and I'm excited to. So they have an open mind, and you get to pitch them, because this is what we do as friends in music. We tell somebody to listen to an artist, and we tell them why. So obviously we'll set the scene. We'll finish setting the scene up afterwards. But because you're a big Mark Lanigan fan and our resident Screaming Trees guy, so imagine I am brand new and I want to listen to Screaming Trees. Describe them. Simply describe them as, a music lover real quick.
Absolutely. By this time, I think Sweet Oblivion was kind of a status change and a medium change for the band. I think Barrett Martin brought a lot to them. But prior to this, man, they were kind of equal parts psychedelic rock with a little bit of garage rock thrown in. They were just kind of like a weird amalgamation. Like a lot of, both Lanigan and the Connor brothers were kind of into some of the punk bands from the 70s and 80s. They were all big fans of a band called the Gun Club, who I've started getting into pretty recently. So, and Lanigan, I mean, his world was lit on fire by Iggy Pop and people like that back in the 70s when he was a kid. So I think there was kind of a weird mixture where I think the Trees were responsible for a sound that you wouldn't find in some of the earlier iterations of some of the Seattle bands. I mean, even going back to a band like Skin Yard or something like that, I think the Trees kind of had their own little area because, they moved to Seattle and history knows them as a Seattle band, but Ellensburg could not be more different than Seattle. I mean, Ellensburg is basically like a desert town in eastern Washington where not really too many people get out there, not too many people get out of there either. So they were kind of an anomaly from that point. But I would say it's just kind of a weird combination of some interesting stuff where, your only connection to the outside world in Ellensburg for these guys would be the music that they were listening to at the time, which you never know when it was going to come in. You never know which record stores were going to have stuff. So kind of similar to like the Bainbridge Island thing that we reference all the time, where you're kind of out there and you have a connection, but nobody's really informing your taste on where to go or what to do. And by this time, they had toured relentlessly. They were known as much for their live shows, and perhaps more for their live shows than they were for the moving qualities of their studio albums. So I'd say a band with a lot of really great energy, a lot of animosity in the band, which I think raises the level that they played. So there's an intensity to their music that I think comes from where they came from and how much they needed the band as a vessel to get out of where they came from, that shines through in a lot of their music. So I think that's how I would describe this band.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, just, said briefly, this is when Nirvana and Pearl Jam were at its biggest. So you got like kind of the little brother band, making music and just full of soul. Like if you like good rock music, this band is like the musicianship and the way that the synergy that they have when they play, like we're going to talk about with this album. I mean, every song is driving and just going like with feel, and it captivates you. Like their music captivates you in just like moving around in your car. And I think that, because they weren't like commercially successful up until this point, and this was, you could even argue how big of a success, compared to other bands it was.
Certainly.
But like, they kept their integrity of like playing music because they loved it and like scratching that itch. So like, I think you just get like a really raw band that is, going to give you, rock music, psychedelic. It's interesting that they were indie first, because I hear a lot of that in their compositions as well.
Totally.
And so like, it's just one of those like really authentic bands from the time that are just as good as the other bands, but don't get the recognition. So like looking back when you're, 25 years, I mean, you're just looking for good music in the time. You're not necessarily like choosing, like back in the day, you probably chose, I buy this record or buy Pearl Jam, I buy Nirvana or I buy this. So, people are making choices now. You can go back and you kind of like are searching for music differently. So
it's happened. It's happened so many times throughout music history where there's a specific geographic scene, and more often than not, there are more bands that are talented than the market has space for. Yeah,
I mean, think about the record labels. They can only sign so many bands at the time.
And there's only so many records that the public is going to buy, and there's only so wide of a net that commercial acclaim can scoop up with it. And the Screaming Trees, for the most part, weren't scooped up by that net. I mean, Sweet Oblivion was their most successful album commercially, and it sold 300,000 copies, which is a massive number, certainly for the Trees too, especially with their indie label origins, but pales in comparison to what every one of the major Seattle counterparts were doing at this time. So Lanigan had a lot of feelings about the Trees and isn't particularly fond of a lot of the stuff that the band did, especially before Sweet Oblivion, and didn't really feel that they were ever really successful. He'd used something to the effect of the closest we'd ever come to mainstream success and the closest we would ever get to it in the Trees happened with Sweet Oblivion. And I would say it's certainly their best record. I'm not the biggest fan of some of the stuff that happened before Sweet Oblivion. It's interesting, but it just doesn't rise to the level. And I think the approach that they took with this record raised it to a level that wasn't possible before with some of the decisions and just the process that the band had used. So Mark Pickerel left the band in 1991 as the drummer, and Barrett Martin ended up replacing him for this record. This was the first major label record that Martin ever worked on, and the first one that he ever worked on with the Trees. And prior to this, Mark Lanigan was just the singer of the Screaming Trees. He wasn't an active participant in really any of the writing, either musically or lyrically, which really, really, really bothered him. And it made it very difficult for him to feel any connection with the music. And prior to the band getting into the studio or even beginning to write for Sweet Oblivion, he gathered the Connor brothers together and told them that he was going to quit the band because he had no connection with the music and he wasn't passionate about it. He didn't like the lyrics, and it was very hard for him to, relentlessly tour the country singing songs he had no connection with. So the Connor brothers, particularly Gary Lee Connor, who wrote a lot of the songs and wrote the lyrics to those songs that he wrote, finally relented and let Lanigan collaborate and be responsible for the lyrics. So Sweet Oblivion was the first time that Lanigan was putting pen to paper on the lyrics. And I think that raises the level. They also took a much more collaborative approach with the songwriting than they did on their prior records. And once again, I think collaboration between talented people always raises the bar. It's a little bit more difficult because you have to allow other people to take ideas. And certainly if you read Mark Lanigan's accounting of the time, the Connor brothers, particularly Gary Lee Connor, was quite territorial over the band and over the direction of the band in terms of what music they were going to write. So this was really the first iteration where every band was on as close to equal footing as they were going to get on during the lineage of this band. So, from going from, hey, I'm the singer and I'm quitting the band to you're actually going to let me do what I want to do and apply my craft here. Because at this point, Mark Lanigan had some experience writing solo stuff, and he had proven to himself that he could be a songwriter. And certainly some of his earlier solo stuff, I think The Winding Sheet and Whiskey for the Holy Ghost, which he was starting to write at this time, is really, really great stuff. And he absolutely has the chops to do it, as you find out on this record and through the rest of his solo career. So that's kind of the background here. And they were able to get in the studio, and collaborate on these songs and put them together. And the interesting thing too, as we said, Gary Lee Connor was the chief songwriter for the Screaming Trees. And, as it always happens, Gary Lee Connor did not write what ended up being their most popular song, which was Nearly Lost You, as we mentioned, featured on the Singles soundtrack, which came out in June of 1992. Evidently, Van Connor took a bunch of acid one night and was fucking around on the guitar, and he recorded a demo of what would become Nearly Lost You. He sent it to Mark Lanigan. Mark immediately called Van up, was like, hey, dude, like, I don't think you know what you did, but you just wrote our next hit. Like, this song is fantastic. And Mark heard it for the first time and immediately knew how he wanted to write the lyrics immediately. It just came to him in one of those serendipitous moments. So that kind of set the tone. And I think Barrett Martin coming on was absolutely massive for this record. He was only 24 at the time. He had been in Skin Yard, most notably by this time working with Jack Endino and that band. And Barrett Martin, I've always appreciated him as a drummer, as we know him from Mad Season as well, obviously being the drummer in that project. But I think he raises the standard quite a bit throughout this record. And
Absolutely.
when you listen to it, I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but their producer didn't want Barrett to play with any click tracks or anything. So Barrett was really the timekeeper of these sessions and the timekeeper of these songs. And he had a lot of jazz influence in him. The interesting thing, when he joined the band, he didn't know anything about the punk scene, which the Connor brothers and Lanigan so revered. He had no knowledge of any of those bands, really. And his background was heavy into jazz. So he brought that component to them. The existing members of the Trees shared their punk influences, and it just kind of created this synergy where people brought what they had been influenced by and what they were comfortable with and what they knew, and they created something entirely new that didn't sound anything like some of the prior Trees records.
Yeah, it's the synergy that they come together is so much fun in my eyes. And like when I was listening to, I believe it was the second, or it was the first track, it was Shadow of the Season, and they're jamming. Like they have this, I'm a big Dinosaur Jr. fan, and although Jay Mascis like sounds nothing like Mark, obviously there's like they don't sound alike, but when they're jamming and the guitar is rolling and they have this like the indie rock that you're talking about, and like the jazz influence in there, and the basically the jams, exactly what you're talking about. When he doesn't use a click, like it kind of accelerates a little bit into the jam more than you'd maybe expect. It's just always a little bit faster tempo, and they're really similar in that sense. And I appreciate that a lot because it's exactly how jamming works. And we played music with my buddies, and we learned Nearly Lost You a few years ago, and I remember playing it with the track and trying to play Barrett's part, and like it's not it's not like a hard part, but playing along with the track was pretty difficult because it's fast and there's like there's things like, and then all of a sudden you get like you're playing it live with other people and you're in control of it, and it makes so much more sense, and you can obviously get through it in a much better and cleaner way. And I just find it interesting because that's exactly, I was like playing along. I was like, man, this is, he's doing something different here and he's doing whatever, but then you go and play it and you kind of make it your own and it works. And
Mm-hmm.
I love those type of jams. And, it's just,
Yeah.
the whole album is full of them.
Yeah, that shines through on Dollar Bill as well. The tempo is not consistent throughout that song. And I noticed that, like, trying to fuck around and play along with it on my guitar. Like, the verses are a little bit slower than when the chorus kicks in. And all of a sudden, you got to play a little bit faster to stay on time with it. And there was always a little bit of a different element when they would play these songs live. And going back to, they cut their chops. They toured relentlessly for SST on like tiny little headlining tours or in support of other bands that were on the label. So they were absolutely grizzled road veterans. The band had probably broken up at least a dozen times while they were on the road throughout the 80s and early 90s. And they brought that ferocity with them when they played live. And I think, not using a click track and, a lot of these songs.
Punk.
Yeah, and a lot of these songs were born out of jams of the band getting together in different spaces, and I think you can hear that with the way that these songs are constructed. So it's just kind of an interesting approach. There's so many different schools of thought on how an album should be made. Whether everybody should come in with demos or whether they should all work on demos together. And who's to say which one is better or worse? I think at a different point in a band's life, there's different concepts and approaches that work better. And I think the Trees picked the correct one at this time because it was really make or break. By this time, they'd been signed to Epic, and everybody and their brother was getting famous coming out of the Pacific Northwest, seemingly except the Screaming Trees. They hadn't had that commercial success. So it's like, hey, like, we got to put up or shut up or else we're going to get knocked out of Epic Records. And that's going to be the end of the band, especially when you consider the fact that Lanigan at this point was more or less looking for any excuse to get out of the band. This was really their, they were kind of on the edge of the cliff here, and somehow they stuck the landing and put together a really, really, really solid record. And as we said, this one sold 300,000 copies. And in Mark Lanigan's book, he kind of motherfucks the whole singles thing. Obviously, the movie, I don't think there's any Seattle musician that's fond of the movie itself. The soundtrack in that album, it's always interesting, too, because the singles movie didn't come out till later in 1992. And the soundtrack release actually preempted the movie release, which I believe is pretty rare as far as major films are concerned. And Nearly Lost You was a really, really big driver of the popularity of the single soundtrack. So a lot of people that I think would have perhaps purchased Sweet Oblivion had it come out around the same time as the single soundtrack, bought the single soundtrack record and not Sweet Oblivion. So they didn't really stand to benefit too terribly much from their inclusion on that in terms of sales, which really kind of kneecapped, I think, where Sweet Oblivion could have gone, because Nearly Lost You is a hell of a song, but I don't think it's their best. And I think there's several tracks on Sweet Oblivion that are just as good, if not better. And it's kind of in the same vein as, you think about a band like Blind Melon, certainly stylistically so different, but there's so much more of a band than just No Rain. The same way I think the Trees are so much more of a band than just Nearly Lost You.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's just really interesting hearing, that was a really real a reality that it came out a little bit early and took away a lot of the steam. Because at the time, I mean, if there was one single or one song, like you'd buy the record just for that. And if you kind of got burnt out on that song or heard it, and you haven't maybe have the single soundtrack, like it takes away your need to buy.
100%. And I think that's kind of what happened here with this record a little bit. But it's kind of interesting because Lanigan has his book, the Connor brothers, while Van was alive and Gary Lee's still with us. But, they had spoken a lot about their time in the Trees. And this is the time that everybody zeroes in on because it was when they were at their most successful. But in the aftermath of Mark Lanigan's death, Barrett Martin did quite a bit of writing about the process and about just different stories that he had with Lanigan. And he wrote a really, really long entry on his social media pages about the making of Sweet Oblivion, and who better to hear from than somebody who was actually in the room as opposed to a couple of people who were born after Sweet Oblivion came out.
We're here to read it for you.
Yes, we are.
so you don't have to.
This is a great story here, and it tells you just about everything you need to know about the making of Sweet Oblivion. So this is his third installment in a series of stories commemorating the life of Mark Lanigan that Barrett Martin wrote back in 2022 when Lanigan died. And
I was
Yeah.
just want to say, yeah, and basically, like, me and Chris talked about it before, and it is a little lengthy, but like, I mean, this is the best description of what it was like in the moment and hearing about it. So obviously, we give it's just right from Barrett Martin's mouth. So we're just gonna read it and take the time to do it because it's better than what we could say.
Absolutely. And we'll have a little discussion about it afterwards. So let's get into it. Barrett Martin. This next story is a bit of a backtrack as it's about the actual making of the album Sweet Oblivion, which at the time of this writing took place exactly 30 years ago this month. Part of this story was originally used as the liner notes for a limited edition repress of the vinyl in 2013. However, few people ever read it, and I always thought it was a great description of how to make a rock album, regardless of who the band might be. Sweet Oblivion was only the third album I had made at that point in my life, and I was only 24 at the time. But for me, it still stands as one of the greatest rock albums I was ever a part of. So for all you grandchildren out there, this is how you make a right, proper, cracking rock album. It's hard to forget the first time you ever saw the Screaming Trees, or the last time for that matter. They always left a lasting impression that a person didn't soon forget. I first saw them in 1989 when they played a show at my former college, Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. The Trees were already a well-known Northwest band by then, having formed in 1985 and releasing a handful of critically acclaimed indie rock albums on the legendary SST label. My very first rock band, Thin Men, was picked to be the opener for the show, and we did our punk rock best against the rising tide of what was fast becoming known around the world as grunge. When the Trees finally took the stage that night, I remember being awed at the sight of the Connor brothers as they bookended the tall, stoic figure of Mark Lanegan, all of which was propelled by the bombastic playing of their original drummer, Mark Pickerel, as the Trees threw down lightning bolts of sonic fury.
The following year, I was playing drums for proto-grunge veterans Skin Yard with the producer Jack Endino on guitar. Jack had produced Nirvana's Bleach album, as well as the Screaming Trees' superb album Buzz Factory. By the autumn of 1991, Skin Yard was returning from our first and only European tour, and we essentially called it quits on the flight home from London. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from Van Connor asking me to audition for the Trees. It was December of 1991, and my audition was at a place called the Olympic Foundry in South Seattle. It was literally a place where they forged iron and still do to this day. But the owner of the foundry also loved rock and roll, so he made some rooms available for local bands to rehearse. My audition was essentially a jam session with Van on bass and Gary Lee on guitar. And the three of us had a wonderful creative time working on the new songs that were still in their infancy. We played early versions of Shadow of the Season, Dollar Bill, and Nearly Lost You, as well as several other skeletal ideas that later evolved into the songs. Our musical chemistry was immediate, and on the next day, Van called and offered me the gig, which I immediately accepted.
We began to rehearse regularly at the Foundry, getting the new songs arranged and tightened up, until one day when the brothers visited me at my warehouse loft on Jackson Street in the International District. They decided on the spot that they wanted to move the band's backline into my loft and start rehearsing there instead of the Foundry, largely because I had a kitchen, a bathroom, and a refrigerator for cold drinks. I have said more than a few times over the years that a drummer can usually get a gig if he has a great rehearsal space, because the bands will flock to him. In my case, that loft on Jackson Street had been the perfect rehearsal space for Thin Men, Skin Yard, and now the Screaming Trees as we honed our musical ideas. The rehearsals at the loft had a fiery, energetic quality to them, which I think was partly due to my influence as a new drummer, but also because we had exceptionally good songs that were really taking shape. We continued to rehearse diligently for another month as Mark Lanegan added his evolving lyrics to the mix. We would methodically go through the songs, arranging and perfecting them as we went, and we also talked about our influences and the musical direction we wanted to take when it came time to finally record the album.
Sometime after the new year of 1992, we had a meeting with Bob Pfeiffer, our A&R from Epic Records. He flew to Seattle to observe us as we recorded demos for all the new songs in a whirlwind one-day session at Seattle's Avast Studios, which was produced by Jack Endino. The next day, Bob sat us down and told us that because the Trees' previous album, Uncle Anesthesia, hadn't sold well, even though it was a great album, and because bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam were now selling albums by the millions, we were really in a make or break situations. In other words, if we didn't make one hell of a great album that got some serious attention and sold well, we would likely be dropped from the label, and that would be the end of the band. This was to be the first major label album I had ever played on. but it was also looking like it could be my last. Thus, I joined the Screaming Trees with the odds of an underdog, a metaphor that I have always kept close to my heart, and which very aptly applied to the trees. And that's because when the underdog has the odds stacked against him, he has to work twice as hard to overcome them. Everyone is betting against them, yet they're also secretly hoping that he will win, and that's the true power of the underdog.
I love that.
Oh,
About
yeah.
a month later, we got the official green light from Epic Records that our demos and recording budget had been approved, so we packed up our gear and had everything shipped to New York in giant wooden crates. I put my personal belongings in a storage unit, I gave up my lease on the Jackson Street loft, and I said goodbye to this space where so many great songs and albums have been written and so many friendships forged. It was February of 1992, and I was only 24 years old. It was the end of the early grunge era. However, it was also the beginning of an entirely new era in Seattle rock history. We flew to New York the next day, and we met up with our producer Don Fleming and our engineer John Agnello. We converged at the studio Don had picked out for us called Baby Monsters, located on 14th Street in the Chelsea district of Manhattan. The studio was small and rustic, as warehouse studios tend to be, but it also had many vintage guitars and amps, and enough space to get a good cracking drum sound. We set our gear on the first day, and by the second day, we were tracking the first basic tracks. The sessions were hot, as they say, very focused and inspired with an intense energy that surrounded us. We'd been working for many hours throughout the day and late into the night, and around midnight, we'd start breaking off into groups to take a car back to our hotel, the Gramercy Park Hotel. Now, back in 1992, the Gramercy Park Hotel was not the glamorous hotel it is today. It had been glamorous in the 1920s, but by the 1990s, it was a rather grimy and run-down affair. Van Connor and I roamed together, and we joked that we might catch Legionnaire's disease as we languished in our dark, sweltering room. Thus, we rarely spent any time there except to sleep, choosing instead to walk the late-night streets of Manhattan every chance we got.
Conveniently, Gramercy's best feature was its downstairs bar, which was a watering hole for every rock musician who was passing through New York on tour. Everyone made a stop at the Gramercy Hotel bar. It was a destination point, and every night, Van and I would return from the studio to have a nightcap before retiring to our room of gloom. Almost every night, we'd run into someone from some other band that we had known from our previous time on the road, and we would lead to a long night of highly animated, exaggerated story and even outright lying.
I fucking love this story, man.
I love that. No, it's so good. I remember a lot of laughing in that bar and clinking of glasses and a room so thick with cigarette smoke that it seemed like a cowboy saloon from the Wild West than a hipster bar in Manhattan. And when I look back at the month we spent recording in New York, I mostly remember the inside of the Baby Monster studio, the Gramercy Hotel bar, and a pizza joint across the street on whose $1 slices we survived.
I'm loving this more and more.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps the most important thing in the making of an album was the philosophy we took as we approached each song. We believed that it was our highest goal to serve the song first, whatever that meant, and whatever the song needed. Usually that meant simplifying our parts and playing with more feel and emotion, rather than a technically perfect performance. I remember that Don Fleming didn't want me to use a click track for any of the songs, and instead the band would follow my natural tempos as they ebbed and flowed. This made the music come alive, and you can hear that feeling in the songs. Breathing, waiting, and then accelerating with explosive power like a sprinter at the starting gun. We recorded the rhythm tracks live as a band with Mark singing a scratch vocal, which we would later re-sing after we had picked the final takes. We usually got the basic track within the first 3 or 4 takes because we were so well rehearsed. Sometimes it was even the second take that had the magic we wanted. We'd often keep a take even if there was a slight mistake in it, and that's because we were recording onto 2-inch magnetic tape. With tape, you have to make a decision after each performance and decide if that was the one, and if not, you took the chance that you'd lose the take when you recorded over it. A great basic track, even with a slight mistake or flaw, always has more life and character than a technically perfect performance with no soul. And that's because a great song represents life itself, full of mistakes and flaws and soul. And as every Screaming Trees fan knows, the Trees were all about the soul. That became our benchmark. Does the song have soul or not?
That's so good. I love that those 2 paragraphs talking about
Dude, Barrett is the man. Like he's such an intellectual when it comes to this stuff.
And he's got more. So, all right.
Yeah, he does.
After the basic tracks were finalized, Lee would do a few guitar overdubs, but not too many, and usually not more than a second rhythm guitar with a lead or a solo. I would record some simple hand percussion like tambourine or shaker, and then Mark would sing the final vocal performance after drinking a small amount of whiskey that Don Fleming would measure out in small dose. Don's theory was that the whiskey warmed the vocal cords and put a little hair on the voice. Mark didn't like whiskey, and he only drank gin, but his vocal performances on Sweet Oblivion are arguably some of his best in his long and varied career. That combined with the band's ferocious musical delivery is what gave the album its classic, timeless quality. As we were finishing the last few overdubs of the album, the final mixes started coming back from Andy Wallace's studio across town. Andy had mixed Nirvana's Nevermind, Jeff Buckley's Grace, and a slew of other brilliant albums that had been hugely influenced in the previous year, and definitely had the golden year. And when we heard this first mix of the song, No One Knows, we knew right away that we had a very special album on our hands. Andy mixed about one song per day for the next 2 weeks, including all the B-sides, and they were immediately sent over to Epic's office for final approval. Word came back that the label was very excited and the band was relieved, and it seemed like a Hangman of Doubt would not be getting his silver coin after all.
A few weeks later, Van and I returned to New York to master the album with Howie Weinberg, who liked to master rock albums at full volume. Needless to say, that methodology suited our music very well, and I'll never forget how good our album sounded that day in Howie's mastering suite. We gave our album the title of Sweet Oblivion because of a line in the opening track, Shadow of the Season, in which Mark sings, "Oh, sweet oblivion feels all right." I think it was also because we had been living that lifestyle for the past few months, jetting back and forth between Seattle and New York, and it was deeply embedded in the feeling of the album.
In the spring of 1992, Epic Records decided on a September release date, which gave them the opportunity to release our first single, Nearly Lost You, for the single soundtrack. This turned out to be our first and biggest hit, cracking the top 10 in rock charts, and even President Bill Clinton used the bridge
Slick
of Nearly
Willie.
Lost. Even used the bridge of Nearly Lost You as a soundtrack for his inaugural entrance onto the global stage. It was a surreal. That's so funny. It was a surreal time, to say the least. But we hit the road for the 2 straight years touring around the world, a story that would require many more words from this story can accommodate. When I listen to Sweet Oblivion today, I hear the rise and fall of the tempos, the ferociousness of the music delivery, and the emotional tension and release of the songs. Mark's vocals roar and howl with the wisdom of a man much older than 27 years he was at the time. He tells stories that are both majestic and spiritual, as well as haunting and ephemeral,
yeah.
Ephemeral, yes, sorry. Gary Lee's guitar work is highly original and inspired, even brilliant in places, and the rhythm section work of Van's bass and my drumming makes the band swing like a battleship in a hurricane.
Now, in the 21st century, most albums are recorded to click tracks that they are programmed with drum machines, so the rhythmic feel is linear, extremely sterile, and utterly lacks swing. I tend to think that a great album, like a human being, should be a fluid, living, breathing entity. The body inhales and expands, and then it exhales and contracts. So too should the feel of a song move, like the expansion of the human body. It is life, after all. This is also why when we hear a great rock band, we all feel it in a much different way. It reminds us of our early origins, when live, organic music kept us warm and safe around the embers of the collective fire. That was the power of the Screaming Trees when we made A Sweet Oblivion in the deep New York winter of 1992. We brought the fire and we captured it on magnetic tape in real time with swing and soul. It's an album about love, hope, the possibility of the future, with a fearless abandon that says, I will go for it all right here and right now, because I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. We were the total underdogs, but we were also the champions of the people, and that is why we are still in their hearts. And that's Barrett Martin discussing the making of Sweet Oblivion in the winter of 1992. And
those last 5 paragraphs are so good. And those last 2, like the breathing and filling up the chest, and like that's how like life feels and how the songs have life and should feel. Like I love those descriptions, and that's kind of like how I view this, this album from them for sure.
My first thought after reading that story is
and thank you all for bearing with us, because it was lengthy, but like
that's the longest excerpt we've ever read on the Grudge Bible podcast. We're
UPB.
Covering uncharted waters here, even almost 5 years in. But first thing I think about, and it makes complete and utter sense, is just getting inside Barrett's mind and how he approached the drumming and what the environment was like. Because for so many years I had listened to this record, and those instances where you try to play along with it, or whether you're thinking about what the tempo's like, it's not mathematically accurate and precise the whole way through, but it adds something that one is so hard to replicate, and number two, there's no substitute for. And the fact that it came, and the fact that they were thinking of it as a breathing organism, it shines through so perfectly with this music. And I think had they made these songs to a click track, or had they tried to be as consistent or play as perfectly as possible, you lose so much. And I think that's why some of the best bands in the world are lauded for what they do live as opposed to what they do in the studio, because playing live is the most living and breathing of an organism that you can be when it comes to music. And the fact that they were able to channel that in the studio and also get hooked up with people, producers and engineers that were fully on board with that process, I think uncovered something that a lot of bands don't have the mind to try. They don't even attempt to do it, but there's so much to gain when you're able to do that. And I think it starts with having a great rhythm section. And Barrett Martin was an unbelievable drummer. He still is. And the late Van Conner was a hell of a bassist. And the way that Gary Lee Conner would solo, especially too, like I feel a lot of the psychedelic influences there. There's so much going on that I don't think is conventional when it comes to how you would play the guitar or how you would track this stuff. And Mark Lanegan, man, oh man, his vocals, the amount of times that Barrett Martin referenced the soul of this record, I think Mark Lanegan's voice is so unbelievably soulful. And there are points in this record too where, you think about Mark Lanegan and all the old tropes about how he sounds like Tom Waits and how his voice is so dark and gravelly and low down. I mean, he has some range on some of these songs. And, I think about like Troubled Times, for example, the chorus of that, like he gets up there and he's able to get up there without sacrificing even 1% of the soul that he approached this music with. And there's just so much color added in every single note that these guys played and every single note that Mark sang. And it's just a really, really perfect iteration of a band getting together. And for you kids out there, this is the blueprint. As Barrett said, this is what you want to do. Get rid of those click tracks and see what you can come up with.
Yeah, just to, explaining my thoughts on that. I think there's a lot of bands that it's like when I look at art and music, like I have this natural kind of gravitational pull to imperfections and whatnot. Exactly what he's talking about. Like when I hear something like super polished and kind of like there is no soul, it feels robotic. And although it's like done really well and edited great, it doesn't like have the same feeling. And I do this. I talked about this past weekend. When someone posts a picture that's perfect, or they post the video with all the perfect edits and whatnot. Like there's something like unsaid about the VHS tapes where it's just silence, and you hear the crackling in the background, like it's not good audio, it's not this. The pictures that are like slightly out of frame, but like they just capture real life. And music, like I've always been attracted to, the Modest Mouse, the Midwest emo, the scratchy classic rock stuff. Like back when you had to make a choice, like, oh, we recorded this, there's some flaws. Do we keep it or do we try it again for the perfect take? And, he describes this perfectly. Like, sometimes it's better to have those things because it gives, it's like birthmarks. It makes you unique when you have these like, a crack in the voice or the guitar, like, slightly out of tune. That stuff's like, that's like their DNA of the song. So I think that everybody or most people are, attracted to that without even knowing, like the authentic people want authenticity. Like that's all people talk about is being like real and authentic nowadays. But like, when it comes down to it,
this is how you do it.
Yeah, this is what it means to be real and authentic. It's like, oh, this isn't my best work, but there's a reason. Not like, it is their best work, but it's not like perfect in the eyes of whatever, the subjective.
Yeah, if you're approaching it from like how perfect the notes are and everything. And I think the two most pivotal decisions are, one, no click tracks, and number two, recording onto the magnetic tape. It's not like it is now where you can load in hundreds of takes onto a hard drive and play for the edit or sing for the edit and splice together, this thing from take one, this take from, this one from take 19. And it kind of recalibrates your expectations, and it also recalibrates your goals when you're playing, because you have to make that split decision. Like after you lay a track down where it's like, hey, like, do I want to save this? Do I think there's something here, or am I going to tape over it, in 5 minutes? And I think that really, makes clear what your priorities ought to be when you're recording. And for a band that had such a ferocious presence live, to be able to like, I might have missed a note here, or I was a little bit off time here, but it had the energy there. And that's the
Yeah.
thing, man. Like the energy, like you don't have to have a musical background. Like I don't know any sort of technical. I have no technical knowledge when it comes to music, but like when something has that energy and that motion, you don't have to have the technical knowledge because you feel it. And it's a difference between knowing something and identifying it versus feeling it. And to rely so heavily on the feel of things, I think it raises the ceiling that you can achieve. You know, if you're playing for the edit and if you're splicing together everything that's perfect, you know, your floor is going to be relatively high because it's going to sound correct in that way. But when you're playing with feel and soul like that, and that's your goal, is how do you transpose the energy into the room onto the record? That raises the ceiling so much higher because you have to have good improvisational skills. You have to trust your other band members. And for a band that had so much animosity personally between the members, the fact that they were able to get to that level of trust in the studio with this and go with it and listen to others' ideas and play off of the improvisations of others, it really raises the level. And I think you find that on just about every single track here. And this is a really, really strong record, as I said. So much more than Nearly Lost You. I mean, those first three tracks, Shadow of the Season, the fact that it has the lyric that ended up becoming the title of the album is just perfect. It's the perfect lead in for it. And you can tell right from the beginning of that song that this is going to be a different record, unlike anything that the Trees had done. And it really, really sets the tone. And you have like different styles here. I mean, you have Shadow of the Season, you have Nearly Lost You, Dollar Bill, more or less. Those things are kind of more like ballads. Dollar Bill is one of my favorite songs of the entire era. Chris Cafaro actually shot and directed and produced the music video for that song as well. You know, great friend of ours, and he has a good post on his blog about the making of that. And dude, it just goes and goes. And there's even songs that don't get a lot of the eyeballs or don't get a lot of the ears that I'm really impressed by even to this day. Like when I was prepping for this episode, the song Butterfly really, really jumped out to me. There's just so much texture in that song that I think is really, really emblematic of what they were doing in the studio.
Yeah, talking about I did like when I play music with other people. So that first time that you play together, and it's like that first take magic. That's a real thing, and you hear this across all bands and whatnot. Like you kind of have no expectations, and you go in, and the whole point is to gel with the other parts.
Yeah.
And I think once you figure out like, oh, this is the perfect transition, and then you try to nail it down, you start thinking technically versus like feeling. And so it's funny because those first few takes, like obviously they're not rehearsed slash like, you know, it's very raw, but like it captures, you know, the you're just focused on different things, and versus being technically, like if you focus on the technical side, like you maybe lose the you know, just the joy and like the, you know, whatever the musical influence, or you know, all the stuff that comes with it. So you know, I find as across history, there's so many times like, yeah, this is the first take. It was so good. Like everything just like kind of meshed. And once you put expectations on certain things, you can kind of take away from that. And it seems like the Trees, like, I mean, they were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to like play what feels right and let the music take us.
Well,
and
the
that's
other thing too,
love.
like they had made the down payment for these sessions by being so well rehearsed with these songs, but still, like, you know, there's a big difference in how you're approaching something the first time you're playing in the studio versus the 40th time you're playing it in the studio. And you lose a lot along the way. You might zero in on being on time a little bit better, but like that energy of it being the first time you're playing in that space, like, is not something that can be replicated. Like I always think, you know, listening to how they recorded Sweet Oblivion, I can't help but think of the struggle that Pearl Jam had when they were cutting 10. They must have done like 60 or 70 takes of the song Even Flow. And, you know, by the 70th one, they ended up going back and being more partial to one of the earlier ones that they did. Because, you know, there's something in those earlier takes when the song's still a little bit unfamiliar to that space and you're still kind of, you know, stretching your legs a little bit. And there's a little bit more improvisation there than it is, you know, I think. You can't do anything, you know, 30, 40, 50 times, 50 plus times without it ending up becoming a little bit robotic. And the fact that they leaned so heavily into and so consciously chose to not do that, I think is such an asset for this record.
Yeah, exactly. That's well put. I mean, just when bands are playing songs, like if they just re-record and re-release and you compare it to like the earlier recordings of it or the demos, I mean, there's always slight differences and You know, a lot of people like those people love listening to demos before there's, you know, it's figured out at all,
Oh yeah, I
which
mean,
I
there's
find
people that are partial to demos a lot of times because of
that's what I
that.
mean.
Because when something's a little bit unknown, like there's so much to gain. And when you think about, man, I'm so happy. I mean, I think the ensuing 20 something years of Mark Lanigan's solo career proved the point that Mark was the guy who had to do the lyrics for this, and the lyrics on this album are so much better in my opinion than some of the stuff that Gary Lee Conner was writing in the earlier SST days. And Mark said in his memoir too that the fact that he wrote these lyrics, it made it so much easier to play these songs live,
Yeah.
and it made him want to raise his standard even more because there were things he was singing about, things that were important to him. And also, like, writing these lyrics, he was able to take the vocals in a way that he knew what was best for him. He struggled a lot in the early days of the Trees. And if you go back and watch some of their performances from, 87 or 88 or 89, a lot of the songs are sung in a little bit of a higher register than what you'd expect Mark to do because he wasn't the one who wrote the parts. He had just had to come in and perform them on the record and perform them live. But, you got him at a point on this album where he was inhabiting the space where he knew he was best at, and he was singing about things that he was committed to and things that came from his own mind and his own heart. That's another thing, there's no surrogate for that.
Yeah, that's a very important aspect. I feel like it's really important as a singer. I mean, that's how the best way to memorize lyrics and have good feel for the way it should be moved around. It's hard to believe people don't write all their stuff.
Yeah, it's shocking to me. Like, I remember when I first started getting into music, like
Not like everything,
I
but
couldn't
like you hear
fathom that like somebody was just the singer and that
Yeah,
and
there's
that
a
point
lot
is
of
just
people,
covers
obviously.
basically. You're just doing a cover at that point. And I think if soul and feel is your is your ultimate goal, then like everybody's got to be responsible for their own part. And I think that shines through on this one too. I want to talk about a couple other songs on this record towards the back end here. Two of my favorite Screaming Trees songs, Winter Song and then Troubled Times. I think Troubled Times is honestly like one of the best songs that the Screaming Trees ever did, and it's the 9th song on the album. But this has the exact stuff that Barrett was talking about comes through on this record. You've kind of got the tempo raising, and the song has this kinetic energy that builds forward into it. It starts so slow. Mark's kind of like, he's singing really slowly. Barrett's keeping his time. The bass is in there. And then, as they were saying, they were relying on Barrett to kind of, set up these songs. And with this one, as you finish the intro, Barrett starts playing and everything just opens up and everybody's right on it in their own way. And it's really, really perfect.
Yeah, it's almost like they're all soloing it simultaneously, but giving each other room to like get like Gary's like ripping the guitar, the drums are pounding away, and like a good swing driving beat, and then you got Mark kind of as we like to say, flying over top of it, adding in his like the higher range that you're talking about.
Yeah,
just like this is the vocal
it's very
range
present on this one as well,
Yeah.
And you've got like, I mean, the chorus of Troubled Times, for example, or the chorus of Shadow of the Season, like, are so opposite to, I always think of the second verse of Dollar Bill, and he makes an allusion to like Mother Mary coming to him or something like that. It's just so bluesy and low, and it's the same guy, 20 minutes later on the record, he's singing so high, and these guys could write a hook. Like I'm always kind of surprised, and I've said that so many times when we review an album, like a lot of these guys, like, they had such a capacity to just write catchy music. And these guys, like, every single song on this one, like, even like I was talking about Butterfly, like, so catchy. Winter Song, Troubled Times, No One Knows, even Julie Paradise by the end of it. Like, they're just such catchy songs, and they just kind of implant themselves in your head.
So that first song, Shadow of the Season, and if you were to put it on right now and listen to it, like, it could be a Soundgarden song too. The way the guitar comes in, and like obviously Mark's voice comes in, but like if Chris was singing over top of it, like this is Soundgarden. Like if you like the psychedelic rock, I mean, these guys are right there. It's just with the you have a very distinct voice in Mark, and he makes them the Trees, right?
Yeah, man.
Like,
and I think like Barrett,
this is the same music that's going around. It's like these guys are killer.
Yeah, these guys deserve just as much of attention as a lot of that stuff from the 90s. And I think like Barrett kept harping on the word soul. I think something that comes through, like if I had to describe this record with one word, it would be urgency, and it makes perfect sense because like they're playing for their lives on this label, you know, like Sweet Oblivion was right around the corner here with this, you know, they were about to it was about to be it, and like there's a level of urgency that they approach it with, and that's why I think Shadow of the Season, as we were saying earlier, is the perfect intro track because like right when you drop the needle, like there's this building urgency that's in this song, and you know it just opens way up when you get to the chorus, and it's just. Yeah, it's just great music, man. It's really great music.
It is. There's so much Soundgarden in it. It's so funny to me. Yeah, it's a great album. Like how much more you want to get into each song.
There's nothing that we can say that's going to overshadow or further illuminate this record, I think.
Yeah.
I think you just got to listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's 11 songs, 46. Like all these songs are pretty long too, and they really like. I mean, they let them all breathe. They let them all air out. Like I take notice of that a lot of times with albums. Like, all right, all these songs are 4.5 minutes or 5 minutes. I mean, you know, it's a long song and stuff. So you're gonna get. There's a lot of dynamics in this album that make it really fun to listen to because, you know, and like you said, each member is exceptional what they do, and they do a good job coming together.
I think the last point I want to make about this record, because you know Gary Lee Conner was the only guitarist in the studio.
Yeah,
I think it's just as much of an asset to these songs when Gary Lee is choosing not to play as when he's choosing to play. It's just like it's kind of that thing where, you know, if somebody's kind of quiet sometimes when they speak, you're going to make sure that you listen, and it has a lot more of an impact. And I think, you know, the points where he chooses to pause and, you know, when he chooses to come in, I think it just adds, you know, even more texture to it, and it makes his guitar really jump. And I'll tell you, like all throughout the Tree's career, like Gary Lee Conner's guitar, like he had unreal tone. And I think he had that's the other thing about this musical scene, man. Like all of these guitarists, like they staked out their own area, and like you can tell just based off of the tone of their guitars, like who's playing. And I think like the Screaming Trees
thing, man.
Screaming Trees guitar tone, like you know it when you hear it, and they were able to do some unbelievable stuff.
And what he did was, you know, it's like a second vocalist. You know,
really
when
is.
he comes in, like the leads they're just, I mean, the riffs are so distinct, but they come in and it's just like someone singing it with no words, you know, and then it's complimenting, and then, you know, Mark's usually sing along with, but you know, it's like a rhythm singing vocals. It's amazing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, this is a really great record. I'm glad that we finally 255 weeks in, we decided to give it its due.
I know. It was like we were talking about what albums to do, and it's like we haven't dedicated one to the Trees, surprisingly. So, and this is great. Like the older I get, the more I get into Mark Lanigan, as you've been into him for a while and stuff. Well, we've done a lot in this past year, actually talking about his work.
We sure have.
You know, just so we opened up the episode, and I asked you how you describe this band to somebody that's never heard them or want to get into them, and I feel like, you know, similarly, like I've been getting into these guys, you know, the last couple of years, and you know, knowing Mark's story and going back, and there's like another level of appreciation that you can have for these different projects, and
big time.
And I feel like, you know, if you're looking for new music and you can't find it in today, and you go back and you kind of went through the big ones, then you find these tertiary bands that were so good in that time, and for whatever, there's just a lot of good music coming out of these areas, right? Like
should have been just as popular as the next band, you know.
Could have easily been just as popular for one reason or not. I mean, you know, it's really random, especially back when, you know, social media / media in general was a lot harder to be heard or seen unless you were there. So I think that it's always a joy coming back and listening and be like, oh yeah, these guys, like, you know, throw out any preconceived like numbers or where they rank and stuff, and just like listen, and you'll be happy.
Oh yeah. So if you're looking for the blueprint, maybe you have to drop some acid and pick up the guitar, throw the click track out, and drink whiskey while you sing.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all you got to do.
and
have a refrigerator
and disagree with everybody in your band all the time.
Exactly.
And hate each other's guts. No, they didn't hate each other, but
oh, they did for a while.
But they did, yeah. But they did. Oh man.
That's pretty good. Dude.
Pretty much. That's the blueprint. I mean, just do it.
Sweet Oblivion, man.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm thankful for music like, you know, bands like this, music like this. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's a winner.
It's been a joy.
And that's Screaming Trees, Sweet Oblivion.
Yeah, that wraps it up, man.
Yeah, man. Hey, they recorded it 34 years ago this month.
Wow.
February 92,
34.
January, February. Yeah, man.
That's crazy. And Barrett was 24. Love that.
Yeah, man. As we were saying earlier, a lot of the 10s and 20s have become 30s and 35s. And 34 years ago, this sucker was being born.
Awesome.
That's all there is to it, man.
Yeah, go out, go listen to it, drop the needle, have some fun listening to enjoy it. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's it, man. Thanks to our producer.
Barrett said it all.
Yeah, man. Barrett said it all. Don't listen to us. Listen to Barrett. Listen to Mark. Listen to the Connors. Thank you, Drew McFadden, our fearless producer, for jamming another one out into the world for us. Songs of the week, Ethan. I'm going to go with Troubled Times from this record. It's my song of the week. That's what I'm going to do.
That's solid. I think my song, I really like No One Knows.
Hell yeah.
This album. That song is really good. I love I love Gary Lee's guitar in it. And yeah, like I said, there's just he has a really similar sound to Jay Mascis with a much heavier.
And they were all friendly
group
there. Like Jay Mascis and Mike Johnson, both of Dinosaur Jr., contributed to some of Mark's projects over the years, and they were kind of in the same circuit, and they were fans of one another's music. So
totally, and so they both do this
sense.
thing. They have, it's exactly what Barrett said, this swing to it, and the guitar is kind of like, it's just, they're hanging on the notes for like that half second longer than you would think that they move into another one. They hang just a little bit longer, and everything's like just like overflowing into the neck. Maybe the drummer's a little fast and they're hanging on for that last half second, and it just it feels like it just brings everything together. And also while like lengthening their solo could be only 16 measures, but like it feels like it's much longer. Big and time, it's just amazing. So just kind of the way he moves around. It's a wonderful song, among all the other things. But
100%,
I'm into it.
Me too, man.
Love it.
Hope everyone's into it. There's a lot to be into here. So.
Yep. Hopefully you were out there hoping for a Screaming Cheese episode, because that's what you got.
Yep.
And you made it to the end. So congratulations.
Yes, you did. That's good stuff, man.
And congratulations to you too, Chris. You made it to the end.
Thanks, man. Sometimes you just got to finish.
Amazing.
That's it. All right. 255's in the books, and that's all there is to it, man.
Yeah, we'll be back next week, and maybe we'll recap the Super Bowl if it went well for Chris.
Yeah, we'll see. Even if it doesn't go well, we'll have to face the music.
We'll have some opinions.
Yeah, we'll be in sweet oblivion.
I can't wait. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Chris.
Rock and roll, everybody. Stay heavy.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. Peace and love. There will be no more Grunge Bible podcast episodes for the next 6 days. Peace and love. Peace and love. We will not be talking about Nirvana for the rest of the year. Peace and love.
Peace and love. I want for my birthday, I want everybody to say peace and love at 12 afternoon.
God damn. All right, everybody. Bonzer.